In the mid-1980s, one man single-handedly sparked a revolution that threatened the very foundations of colonial power in Africa. His name was Thomas Sankara, and he became the youngest president in African history, only to be murdered just 4 years later. But his death raised more questions than answers, and his legacy continues to challenge the world today. How did a military officer rise to become the face of African self-reliance? What radical changes did he make to his country, and why did so many want him silenced? The shocking events surrounding his assassination continue to haunt us. Was Sankara simply a martyr, or did he die for a cause that was too dangerous for the world to accept? Sankara's story is more than a tale of one man's leadership. It's a testament to the power of vision and the price of defiance. As president of Burkina Faso, he challenged the system, rejected foreign aid, and pushed for radical changes in healthcare, education, and gender equality. But in the blink of an eye, his dream came to an end. Who killed Thomas Sankara, and why is his message still relevant today? Thomas Sankara was born on December 21, 1949, in the small village of Yako, in the French colony of Upper Volta, which later became Burkina Faso. Growing up in a modest family, Sankara was driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to understand the world around him. After his early education in his hometown, he moved to the capital, Ouagadougou, to continue his studies. It was here that Sankara first encountered the political currents that would shape his vision of the world. He enrolled in military training in Madagascar in the early 1970s. And it was there that his eyes were opened to the broader dynamics of colonialism, imperialism, and the struggles of African nations. He began to see the ways in which African countries were manipulated by Western powers, and he soon became a passionate advocate for self-reliance, anti-colonialism, and pan-Africanism. This intellectual awakening was pivotal, as it shaped the ideals he would carry with him throughout his life and later fuel his political career. After returning to Burkina Faso, Sankara's military career progressed steadily. By the early 1980s, he had gained the respect of his peers and a reputation as a sharp, decisive leader. But the country's political landscape was unstable, marked by corruption, widespread poverty, and a lack of effective leadership. The military dictatorship of Jean-Baptiste Ouédraogo was deeply unpopular, and dissatisfaction was brewing. In 1983, Sankara's moment came. A coup orchestrated by a group of young, disillusioned officers, including Sankara himself, overthrew Ouédraogo's regime. The coup was swift, efficient, and symbolic of the growing discontent among the masses. Sankara, who had previously served as a military leader, emerged as the spokesperson for the group and became the new leader of Burkina Faso at the age of just 33. His charisma, vision, and growing popularity made him a natural choice for the presidency. Sankara's vision for a new Africa. From the moment he took power, Sankara made it clear that his leadership would be different. He rejected the Western aid model that had kept African nations dependent on foreign powers for decades. Instead, Sankara envisioned a self-reliant, independent Africa, one that could stand tall without relying on the charity or influence of former colonial masters. He often said, "He who feeds you controls you," underscoring the need for Africa to break free from external control. In his first speeches as president, Sankara condemned the neo-colonial mindset that kept African nations in a perpetual state of poverty. He famously declared that Burkina Faso, the country he inherited, would no longer live in servitude to the whims of foreign nations. Sankara's speeches captivated not just the people of Burkina Faso, but millions across Africa, who were yearning for a new model of leadership, one that rejected colonial legacies and embraced the promise of a self-sufficient future. When Sankara took office in 1983, the challenges facing Burkina Faso were immense. The country was one of the poorest in the world, and its citizens lived in dire conditions. Sankara, however, wasn't just concerned with maintaining power. He was focused on transforming the entire system. His approach was radical, pragmatic, and deeply tied to his vision of an Africa free from foreign domination. From the start, Sankara made it clear that Burkina Faso would not continue to depend on foreign aid. He pushed for self-sufficiency by focusing on local resources, which he believed were the key to Africa's future. One of his first actions was a bold one. He ordered the renaming of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright men, to symbolize a break from the colonial past and a commitment to a new, more dignified future. Sankara's economic policies reflected his determination to make Burkina Faso self-reliant. He initiated an ambitious land redistribution program, taking land from wealthy elites and redistributing it to the peasants. This move earned him widespread support from the rural poor, who had long been exploited by the traditional elites. The government encouraged farmers to focus on local crops such as millet and sorghum, rather than relying on imported goods. Sankara also pushed for major agricultural reforms that prioritized food security and local consumption, believing that agriculture could become the backbone of the country's economy. Perhaps the most widely celebrated aspect of his presidency was his radical stance on women's rights. Sankara saw the oppression of women as one of the greatest barriers to development in Africa. He took direct action to challenge the deeply entrenched patriarchal systems that dominated society. Sankara appointed women to high-ranking positions in his government, including as ministers and in the military. He advocated for women's education, healthcare, and economic independence, and he even banned female genital mutilation and forced marriages in the country. His slogan, "Liberation of women is liberation of society," became a rallying cry for feminists in Burkina Faso and across Africa. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso's health and education systems saw remarkable improvements. Sankara launched massive vaccination campaigns that led to the near elimination of diseases like polio, meningitis, and measles. He also focused on providing basic education to the masses, including building thousands of new schools in rural areas. His government even implemented a program where teachers would travel to remote villages to provide lessons to children who would otherwise not have access to education. Sankara's foreign policy was equally bold. He refused to accept Western aid, believing that it came with strings attached that would ultimately perpetuate Africa's dependency. He also took a firm stance against the debt imposed on African nations by international financial institutions, declaring that Africa would not be a beggar continent. He sought to build solidarity with other revolutionary governments, especially in Africa and Latin America, where leaders like Fidel Castro admired his anti-imperialist approach. His fierce independence angered many Western powers, especially France, which had historically maintained influence over Burkina Faso and many other African nations. Sankara's refusal to bow to Western interests made him both a hero to the oppressed and a threat to the established global order. Despite his popularity among the people, Sankara's reforms were not without resistance. The wealthy elite, who had long profited from the old system, were deeply opposed to his radical policies. They saw their privileges being stripped away, and some began plotting against him. His efforts to reduce corruption also alienated members of the military who were used to the patronage networks that sustained them. Sankara's uncompromising stance on self-reliance and his bold political choices earned him enemies both within and outside of Burkina Faso. His leadership also began to alienate some of his allies. Blaise Compaoré, a close friend and comrade, became increasingly disillusioned with Sankara's approach. While Sankara remained steadfast in his ideals, Compaoré and others in his circle began to see the potential for a different kind of leadership, one that could maintain the status quo and protect their personal interests. The cracks within Sankara's inner circle would prove to be his undoing. Sankara's bold reforms did not go unnoticed on the international stage. His anti-imperialist rhetoric and his refusal to accept foreign aid made him a beacon of hope for many in Africa, but also a major irritant for Western powers. Burkina Faso's refusal to toe the line and accept the Western-dominated aid model was seen as a direct challenge to the status quo. France, in particular, felt threatened by Sankara's push for African self-reliance, as many of its former colonies were still economically tied to Paris through trade agreements and aid. Sankara's open defiance of France's continued influence over African nations angered many in Paris, and it became clear that his vision was in direct opposition to their interests in Africa. Sankara's foreign policy was rooted in a vision of pan-African unity and independence. He was outspoken about the need for African nations to shed the chains of colonialism and stop depending on former colonizers. His refusal to take part in the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and World Bank programs was a direct slap in the face to the financial institutions that had historically controlled Africa's economic policies. Instead of relying on loans that would further trap African nations in debt, Sankara called for African nations to work together to build self-sustaining economies that were free from outside influence. The United States, under President Ronald Reagan, was also wary of Sankara's revolutionary rhetoric and his associations with other left-wing governments in Latin America and Africa. Sankara had strong ties with Cuba's Fidel Castro, and his admiration for other revolutionary leaders was well known. The United States, along with other Western countries, viewed Sankara's policies as radical and feared they might inspire other African leaders to follow suit. His refusal to play by the rules of the global financial system, along with his alignment with socialist and anti-imperialist movements, made him a target for political isolation. While the international community was beginning to turn against Sankara, the pressures at home were mounting as well. His radical reforms had alienated key sectors of the Burkinabe elite. The military, once loyal to Sankara, began to question his policies, particularly his push for austerity and the redistribution of land and wealth. Many members of the military had benefited from the old system, and Sankara's commitment to fighting corruption had cut into their privileges. It didn't help that Sankara's approach was confrontational rather than conciliatory, and his inability to secure widespread support among the traditional power structures led to tensions with powerful elites. Sankara's radical economic and social reforms had also created rifts within his own government. While many of his ministers supported his vision, others began to grow disillusioned with his leadership style. His uncompromising stance, his idealism, and his growing authoritarian tendencies put him at odds with those who favored a more pragmatic approach. As the economic situation in Burkina Faso grew more difficult, due to a combination of the country's limited resources and the external pressure from the international community, dissatisfaction began to spread. Yet, perhaps the most significant blow to Sankara's leadership came from within his inner circle. Blaise Compaoré, who had been one of his closest allies during the coup, began to feel increasingly sidelined by Sankara's radicalism. Compaoré, who had once shared Sankara's revolutionary ideals, started to see a different path forward, one that would preserve his own political future and the stability of the country. Over time, Compaoré's growing resentment would lead to a betrayal that no one saw coming. As Sankara's position weakened and the pressures from both the international community and his own country intensified, the stage was set for a dramatic change. In October 1987, just 4 years after taking power, Thomas Sankara would be removed from office in a military coup led by none other than his former friend and ally, Blaise Compaoré. The coup was swift and brutal. Sankara was killed, and Compaoré took his place, marking the end of an era. The story of Thomas Sankara's fall from power is one of betrayal, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Despite the fierce opposition he faced both domestically and internationally, Sankara's leadership remained popular among the masses. However, the tensions within his government and military were escalating, and the cracks in his inner circle were becoming more apparent. On October 15, 1987, the unthinkable happened. Sankara, the revolutionary leader who had defied the world, was assassinated in a military coup orchestrated by his closest ally, Blaise Compaoré. The events leading to his death remained shrouded in mystery, but the coup itself was swift and brutal. Sankara was reportedly killed in his office, and his body was quickly disposed of. He was only 37 years old. The betrayal was a crushing blow, not only to those who had supported Sankara's vision for Burkina Faso, but to the entire continent of Africa. Sankara and Compaoré had been close friends, sharing similar revolutionary ideals. They had fought together to overthrow the previous regime, and Sankara had entrusted Compaoré with key roles in his government. But behind the scenes, Compaoré had become increasingly disillusioned with Sankara's uncompromising leadership style and his radical vision for the country. Over time, Compaoré grew more aligned with the elites who felt threatened by Sankara's reforms. and he saw the coup as a way to preserve his own power and the interests of the privileged class. Compaoré's rise to power marked a dramatic shift in Burkina Faso. Within hours of the coup, Compaoré declared himself president and quickly moved to dismantle many of Sankara's reforms. The policies that had made Burkina Faso a symbol of African self-reliance were reversed, and the country once again fell under the influence of international financial institutions. Compaoré's government re-established ties with former colonial powers, including France, and began to reintegrate Burkina Faso into the global political and economic system that Sankara had worked so hard to escape. The aftermath of Sankara's death left a deep scar on Burkina Faso and on Africa as a whole. His supporters were devastated, and many felt that the dream of a self-reliant, independent Africa had died with him. Yet, Sankara's legacy did not fade away so easily. Over the years, his ideas continued to inspire a new generation of activists, intellectuals, and political leaders. Sankara's image as a martyr and a symbol of resistance against imperialism grew stronger, especially in countries across Africa that were still grappling with the effects of colonialism and economic exploitation. In the years following his assassination, questions surrounding Sankara's death remained unanswered. Who exactly was behind the assassination? Was Compaoré the sole architect of the coup, or were there other forces at play? Many believe that the coup was not just a personal betrayal, but part of a larger geopolitical strategy to eliminate a leader who had become too much of a threat to the global order. While Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso for the next 27 years, his government was mired in controversy, and his own regime would eventually come to an end in 2014 when mass protests led to his ousting. Sankara's death did not mark the end of his influence. In fact, his ideas on African independence, self-reliance, and anti-imperialism have inspired countless movements and continue to resonate with people around the world. His vision for a more just and equal society remains a powerful force in the ongoing struggle for social justice and economic sovereignty in Africa. In 2015, Sankara's remains were exhumed and a renewed investigation into his assassination began. The search for justice and the truth behind his death continues, but the fact remains, Thomas Sankara died as he lived, fighting for a cause larger than himself, with a vision that would outlast him. Thomas Sankara's story is one of incredible highs and devastating lows. He was a man who defied the odds, rejected the systems of power that held Africa captive, and fought for a vision that many thought was impossible. In just 4 years, he radically transformed Burkina Faso, leading a revolution that touched the hearts of millions. His bold policies on agriculture, health, education, women's rights, and anti-imperialism made him a hero to many. But his untimely death left Africa and the world asking, what could have been? Though Sankara's life was cut short by betrayal and violence, his ideals live on. His call for African self-reliance, his rejection of Western dominance, and his fierce commitment to equality and justice continue to resonate today. His dream of a united, independent Africa has inspired movements across the globe, and his vision remains a beacon for those who believe in a world where the people, not foreign powers, hold the reins of their destiny. But the questions surrounding his death, who was truly responsible and why, continue to loom large. Was Sankara simply a martyr, or was he a revolutionary so ahead of his time that the world wasn't ready for his ideas? While the investigation into his assassination continues, one thing is certain: his impact on the world is undeniable, and his ideas remain as relevant as ever. As we reflect on Sankara's life, let us ask ourselves, are we ready to embrace the radical change that he fought for? Are we willing to challenge the status quo and build a future where freedom, justice, and self-reliance are within everyone's reach? If you want to learn more about leaders who fought for change, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of revolutionary figures who shaped history. Sankara's journey may have ended in tragedy, but his legacy will continue to inspire future generations.